Hello, third graders. Today we'll be reading Lesson 8, Henry Hudson. Our learning targets. I can describe the contributions of Henry Hudson in exploring North America in search of a Northwest Passage. I can write a paragraph stating my opinion on whether Henry Hudson was or was not an important explorer of North America. Here's some vocabulary you'll hear in today's read aloud. Abounds. Occurs in great quantities. For example, the meadow abounds with wildflowers in the month of May. Archipelago, a chain of islands. For example, the Hawaiian archipelago includes 7 inhabited islands. Cultivation, the growing of crops, the caring for crops. For example, the water and nutrients in the healthy, rich soil made the cultivation of crops easy. Narrowed, became narrower, or not as wide. For example, the path narrowed near the footbridge as we hiked up the mountain. What have we already learned? You've already heard about the voyage of John Cabot. The voyage of John Cabot is shown in red dots on the map. The European kings and queens were interested in exploring the Atlantic Ocean and areas to the west of Europe to find shorter, faster routes to Asia. Based on his navigational skills and knowledge of geometry, Cabot had an idea of how to get to the East Indies faster than Columbus did. His idea was to sail farther north, where the distance would be shorter. The name of the route to the East Indies for which Cabot was searching for was the Northwest Passage. Cabot actually found Labrador, Newfoundland, and Cape Breton Island in present-day Canada. Today you will hear about Henry Hudson's expedition and his discoveries. Listen to hear whether he was successful and whether you think he was an important explorer of North America or not. You'll want to set up a scratch piece of paper for note-taking. Our question today is, was Henry Hudson an important explorer of North America? On one side, you'll keep notes on his successes and important discoveries. On the other side, you'll keep track of his unsuccessful events or failures. These notes will be critical in helping you answer your short write question. John Cabot was not the only person who was eager to find a Northwest Passage to the Indies. English explorer Henry Hudson had the same goal. Very little is known about Henry Hudson's early life, but we do know he had an interest in exploring Arctic geography. Hudson made his first attempt to find the Northwest Passage in 1607, more than 100 years after Cabot made his voyages. Hudson's idea about how he might get to the Indies was similar to Cabot's. Hudson's idea was to sail north, right over the North Pole. He knew the polar region was cold and icy, but he also knew that the sun never set during the summer months. He thought the summer sun might melt a lot of ice, making it possible to sail over the top of the earth and come out on the other side of the world in Asia. In May of 1607, Hudson embarked from England with a single ship called the Hopewell. 6 weeks later, in the middle of June, his men sighted the eastern coast of Greenland. Hudson sailed along the eastern coast of Greenland. Then he turned and sailed northeast. He would have headed due north, but ice prevented him. Over the course of their voyage, he and his men saw many unfamiliar creatures, including whales, seals, and walruses. In mid-July, they reached the Spitsbergen Archipelago, which is a chain of islands that has an Arctic climate. When Hudson tried to navigate this region, it was surrounded by pack ice, frozen seawater. On May 16th, Hudson's ship almost got stuck in the ice. For a while, it was touch and go. A few days later, Hudson decided he could not reach the North Pole because of all the ice. He turned around and sailed back to England. In 1608, Hudson made a second attempt to reach the East Indies by sailing the Hopewell across the North Pole. He sailed north of Scandinavia and Russia. He sailed more than 2,500 miles, making it to the islands off the coast of Russia, known as the New Land. But there was so much ice in the water that he had to turn back again. In 1609, Hudson made a third attempt to find the Northwest Passage. This time he sailed for the Dutch under the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch East India Company was a trading company that formed to protect their trade in the East Indies. The company hired Hudson and gave him very specific instructions. He was to follow a similar route he had attempted in his previous voyage, sailing south of Scandinavia and Russia. The hope, as before, was that he would be able to sail over the top of the earth and emerge in Asia. Hudson left Amsterdam, the Netherlands, in April of 1609 on board the Dutch ship the Half Moon. As he made his way north, he saw more and more ice. Eventually, there was so much ice that Hudson decided to give up and turn around in mid-May. Instead of sailing back to Amsterdam, as he had been told to do, Hudson boldly decided to sail west. Hudson sailed across the Atlantic and sighted Newfoundland on July 12th. He sailed along the coast of North America, exploring much of what is now the east coast of the United States. He and his men sailed as far south as Virginia, where the Jamestown settlement had recently been established. Then they turned north. On September 3rd, they came upon a large river that emptied into the Atlantic. Hudson and his men explored the river, sailing upstream. When Hudson saw the river widening out, he thought it might be a passage that would lead all the way through North America. He thought the river he was exploring might just be the Northwest Passage he and explorers before him had been seeking for years. Farther upstream, the river narrowed, and Hudson began to think maybe it would not lead him through the continent. Nevertheless, it was an interesting discovery. Hudson claimed the area for the Netherlands and the Dutch. Hudson and his crew encountered many Native Americans in the Algonquin-speaking tribes on their trip up the river. Some Native Americans tried to attack them, whereas others visited the ship to trade. The Indians offered furs to Hudson in trade, and this started the fur trade along the Hudson River. One group invited Hudson to dinner. Later, Hudson described what he had experienced in his journal. I sailed to the shore in one of their canoes with an old man who was the chief of a tribe consisting of 40 men and 17 women. These I saw there in a house well constructed of oak bark and circular in shape, so that it had the appearance of being built with an arched roof. It contained a great quantity of maize or Indian corn, and beans of the last year's growth, and there lay near the house, for the purpose of drying, enough to load these 3 ships, besides what was going in the fields. On our coming into the house, 2 mats were spread out to sit upon, and some food was immediately served in well-made red wooden bowls. 2 men brought in a pair of pigeons, which they had shot. They supposed that I would remain with them for the night, but I returned, after a short time, on board the ship. The land is the finest for cultivation that I have ever set foot upon, and it also abounds in trees of every description. These natives are a very good people, for when they saw that I would not remain, they supposed that I was afraid of their bows, and taking their arrows, they broke them in pieces and threw them into the fire. In late September, Hudson decided to sail back to Europe. He himself wanted to stay in the New World for the winter, but his men were tired of exploring, and they were threatening to mutiny. The river Hudson discovered on this third voyage was later named after him. Even today it is known as the Hudson River. Other Dutchmen came to this part of the world after Hudson. They built a city at the mouth of the Hudson River on an island the Indians named Mannahatta. The Dutch called this city New Amsterdam. Later, its name was changed to New York. Today, Manhattan is the name of one of the parts of the New York City, and New York City is the most populous city in the United States. In 1610, Hudson set off on a fourth voyage. This time he was sponsored by two English companies, the Virginia Company and the British East India Company. Similar to the Dutch East India Company, these companies were also trading companies. Hudson's goal was the same, to find the Northwest Passage, a water route that would lead through the American continent and allow ships to sail to Asia. Hudson sailed west, but he stayed far to the north. He reached Greenland in early June. A few weeks later, he and his men found a large strait that led to the center of North America. Hudson hoped it might lead all the way to Asia. On August 2nd, Hudson sailed out of the strait and into a large bay. Today, this bay is known as the Hudson Bay, and the strait is known as the Hudson Strait. Hudson spent the next few months exploring the coast of the bay. In November, his ship got stuck in the ice. He and his crew had to go ashore for the winter. It was a difficult, freezing cold winter. The men were fighting with Hudson as well as with one another. Several of them fell ill with scurvy, a disease that preys on people who have not been eating a healthy, balanced diet. When spring came, Hudson wanted to explore some more. Most of the men on the ship wanted to sail back to England. A big fight broke out. In the end, the sailors mutinied. They put Hudson, his son, and some others they did not like, in a small open boat and sailed away. Henry Hudson, the great explorer, was never heard from again. Third graders, our question today is an opinion question. Was Henry Hudson an important explorer of North America? Under the column, yes, listing Hudson's successes and important discoveries, you may have taken note of the fact that Hudson learned that it's not possible to sail over the North Pole, even in summer months, because of ice. Hudson located what today is called the Hudson River and claimed for the Dutch the land that today is known as New York City. Hudson explored waterways around present-day Canada, including what is known today as the Hudson Strait and the Hudson Bay. In your column about his unsuccessful events or Hudson's failures, you may have noted that Hudson tried to sail over the North Pole but had to turn back because of ice. That in 4 voyages, he never ended up finding the Northwest Passage. And that on his 3rd voyage, Hudson disobeyed his orders and sailed west instead. Lastly, when Hudson's crew could not go on, they mutinied and left him on a small boat. There are many other items that you could have taken notes on. These are just a few. You'll now answer your opinion short write, where you will be writing an opinion paragraph.